what's the environment they're exposed to now. So if you set up the environment early, you have a it's easier than for you to maintain a certain beliefs or certain morals standards if your child is surrounded by those influences in their teenage years. And so both of those are valid. It doesn't mean, after you pass a certain point, the parents cannot do anything. Of course, they can still have a role. It's just a small, it's not as large of an influence as the companions and the friends of a person. So when you think about a teenager, when they have a question or have some struggle in their life, usually the first people they go to are their friends or people that they trust or some source that they trust. Maybe it could be the internet, and unfortunately that's not always the most reliable source, but that may be where the teenager maybe wants to go first. So to think about those influences from a developmental course, when the child is very young, the brain is very malleable. It can adapt a lot. So my family and I, we just recently moved to Qatar, and we've been there about 8 months now. And I enrolled my children actually in the Arabic school. And I don't think my kids were very happy initially with that, but they're young, so um, age 7, age 4, their brains can adapt pretty well actually. And they were able, alhamdulillah, they finished the end of last year and they started this year, and they're doing okay, alhamdulillah. So when a child is young, they can adapt to environments easier. The brain can soak up a lot of information. Uh, that, that's why it's such an important time to instill these lessons in our child at the young age. That's why, if you've noticed, children that are exposed to a second language when they're around 6 years old, 7 years old, that's the best time for them to learn the language, right? It's harder when they're 12, 13, 14. It's harder. It's not impossible. They can still gain the language. And even people can gain a second language when they're adults. But it's definitely much easier and less effort when they're around 6 or 7 years old. That's the optimal window of time to get a second language. So throughout our life, there are these windows of time. You have a certain opportunity of time to do certain things that, for whatever reason, Allah decided this is the best time for you to be able to do that. You can't even have children until you're in past puberty. It's physically impossible for you to have children. So Allah wants human beings to have a certain development before they even start having their own children. And then even your childbearing age is only a certain number of years. And then after that, maybe you move to a different phase in your life. So all of these things we have to, remember that there's a wisdom behind it, how our brains develop. So with the digital age, keeping in mind, this is why many neuroscientists will say that for young children, especially 2 years old, 3 years old, they shouldn't have much exposure to any screen time, they call it. iPad, iPhone, computer screens, TV screens even. Some parents used to think that, okay, if I show them an educational program or an educational app, that'll help their brain. But at the age of 2, it's just not appropriate. Their brain is not ready for that type of information, and really they should be looking at the natural world and looking at things in 3D and seeing how people interact, seeing nature, seeing things in a naturalistic environment. Because the brain, you don't want it to get used to something like that that's not even real at such an early age. Then later, when they get older and they can distinguish between reality and what is on the screen, then that may be more appropriate time. So to think about that in terms of where your brain is and what you're ready to accept. So there's certain types of information that your brain just cannot handle at a young age. And that's what we want to make sure we give our children the right exposure to that at the right time. So a lot of us, we know this, but we know it on a theoretical level. But can anyone tell me, why is it that we end up giving our kids these electronics, Why is it so easy just to give them the electronic? Huh? It's a babysitter, right? It's a pacifier, you know? Some behaviors are so difficult to deal with, it's much easier to give the child the electronic device, and it calms them down, distracts them, and then you don't have to worry about them. Um, and I'm guilty of it myself. I believe sometimes in certain situations, it's like it's the best. If you're in a public restaurant or you're someplace and they can't be acting out, and you just need to give them something to pacify them. I understand. As a parent, sometimes you're just desperate for something, and so that becomes your thing. The problem, though, is when it becomes a daily thing on a regular exposure. That is what we don't want. We don't want it to be that's your go-to behavioral intervention. This is my pacifier all the time. This is always my babysitter. Then that's going to be a problem for the child. One of the things is then you can't get the child to engage much in the real world because they would just rather go to the device. It's easier, it's much more quick in gratification. So, the real world is a very slow and messy and frustrating place. You're just driving here in the traffic, You're not going to get there on time, or you miss the exit and you have to turn around. The real world is very slow and frustrating. But that's a skill to learn how to deal with that. If you deprive the child of learning that frustration, how to deal with frustration, they will not be well prepared for the real world. Because the world is meant to test you. That's what we know, that we understand that spiritually as Muslims, the world is meant to test you. It's not meant to be an easy place. Imam al-Haddad, he said, "Ad-dunya la rahata fiha." This world, the material world, has no true relaxation in it. There's always something that's bugging you or frustrating you. There's always some anxiety you have. As soon as you get past one thing, you're worried about something else. You're worried about your schooling. When you finish your schooling, you're worried about your job. When you get your job, then you're worried about your family and who you're going to get married to. And then you got worried about your children. And then you get worried about their future and their livelihood. And it just constantly goes and goes. So the world of electronic devices, it's a nice distraction. It's a beautiful fantasy place to go to, and everything is easy there. Everything comes quick. The videos are all there, and if you don't like that video, you can easily change it. If I don't like where I am at in the real world, I can't do anything to just change the channel. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in traffic, or I'm stuck in a job that I have, or I'm stuck in a certain class. There's nothing I can do. I have to learn how to deal with it. But in the digital world, I can just change the channel. I can just swipe it and change the app. So it teaches the young person, what's the easy way out. And the digital world always has an easy way out. It's meant to do that. Otherwise, they wouldn't sell so many of these things. It's meant to make, that distraction, that ease, so your brain can just go from one reward to the next reward to the next reward. Your brain is getting constantly pleasure signals from interacting with the digital world. So, we have to, one thing I try to tell parents is, don't be scared to disappoint your child sometimes. Sometimes you have to disappoint your child. Or if you're an older sibling and you have a younger sibling or a younger niece or nephew, same concept. You have to show them that sometimes things are disappointing, and don't be scared to disappoint them. That's a skill that will actually benefit them later in life. How to deal with disappointment, how to deal with frustration. Some, parents are very indulgent with their children. They're always giving their children, they're always spoiling the children. And I don't think they're doing it, I think they're doing it out of love. They really love the child, but they don't want the child to go through any hardship or any challenge, so they just kind of make it very easy for them, give them some kind of easy life or easy luxury, or have them, oh, you don't want to eat this? Okay, fine. What do you want to eat? Let me just make something for you to eat. And like the older generations, they'll tell you, we never had a choice in what you're supposed to eat. Your mom puts food in front of you, that's it. if you don't eat it, you're just going to be hungry that night. But now, we cater to the child. What do you want to eat? What can you eat? What's your dietary preference? Do you eat this or you don't eat this? Okay, then I guess none of us, the whole family, we can't eat this certain thing because the child doesn't want to eat it. So the child becomes the one who's defining all of the family's dietary restrictions. And I know the original reason for that was love. But sometimes out of love, we do things that actually are not in the favor of the child. The best example, in the most extreme example, is you'll see this in like children later in life, teenage years, young adults, 20, 30 years old. Especially, I've seen this many times if they have a drug abuse problem. They're abusing drugs. They're addicted to some drug. And you'll find that the family, instead of trying to break the addiction, they end up supporting the addiction indirectly. They don't do it on purpose, but I had one Muslim couple come to me. This was in Mecca. We were making Umrah, and the couple came to me and they told me, we don't know what to do. We've spent maybe, in the last 2 years, we've spent maybe $80,000 buying these pain medications for our son. Pain medications because he was addicted to the painkillers. And so I said, well, why are you spending all this money? And they said, well, he has a job. He has his own job. He makes money, but then as any money he makes, he buys drugs with it. And so we end up having to pay for his rent, pay for his food, things like that. So I said, well, what if you just stop giving him money so that he's not dependent on you, that he doesn't have that as a safety net? Right now, there's no consequence to his behavior. He can do anything, and there's no bad result for him. So the mother says, how can I do that? How can I put my son out in the street? He'll become homeless. I said, yeah, but eventually he'll get off the drug. We know that people have to be cut off from their financial means if that's what they're using their money for. There's no other way. Otherwise, if they still have the money, they're going to still buy the drug. There's no way out of that cycle. But that's a very harsh thing for a parent to consider. How can I cut my child off? How can I stop providing for them? In this, normally I agree, but in this situation, that is actually the way that you would benefit your child. You would help them break this pattern. So it's not the easiest thing to understand that sometimes you have to give your child disappointment or withhold something from them, prevent them from doing something they want to do out of their own interest, for their own benefit. That's one of the hardest things for parents to do. So that's just a very extreme example. Inshallah, may Allah protect us and our family and all of our children. I don't want that to be I hope that is not the problem that our communities face, although some people in our communities are facing that. It's a very real problem. But that's a very extreme example. I'm just using that to illustrate that even on a small scale, not exposing your child to certain foods or giving them a very luxurious experience because you want them to be comfortable, this can actually have a negative effect on their lives later on. Imam Ramli has this book, Riyadat al-Subyan, which Sayyid Aman has here, a copy of it. And in it, he says some very interesting things. Some of it, I think, are more appropriate for his time that he's in. So you can't take all of those things literally. But some of the things he says, one of the points he makes is that we should not try to give our children always the most luxurious experience. It doesn't mean you have to give them a poor experience and give them poverty, but just give them the normal things sometimes. The normal clothing, the normal food, the normal situation. When I flew to Qatar, the company, the hospital that hired me, they gave us all business class tickets. So my children were all in business class and we're flying in the airplane. But I was thinking to myself, man, I don't want my kids getting used to this, because this is what they're going to demand then every time. They're going to think this is normal. This is not normal. So when we flew back in the summer, we just flew economy because I want them to experience that. Like, this is what normal people experience. We don't have to take a boat, We don't have to spend months and months on a camel to go. We can fly, it's fine. But at least the normal experience should be the most frequent one. So when they get older, they realize this is normal. The problem is now, and I see this a lot in the Gulf countries where children have a lot of wealth and their parents are very wealthy and their kids get a lot of luxurious experiences, is they think that's normal and that's what they deserve. And when they don't get it, they're very upset and frustrated. They're like, what's going on? It seems to them like oppressive or some kind of injustice. Like, that how come I didn't get this luxury or that luxury? I always got it growing up. So to teach our children, again, you don't have to give them a very poor experience, but give them just the normal experience most of the time. Every once in a while, you can show them the luxurious experience, give them the indulgence so they might see it as a reward, or they see it as a lucky thing, or they see it how fortunate it is. But you don't want them to get used to that. Because the other thing is, if your child is too pampered or too comfortable all the time, again, as I mentioned, you're actually making it harder for them later in life. What are they going to do when they're on their own in college by themselves or working on their own in their first job, the first time in their life? They have to go and make their own breakfast, dress themselves, go to work by themselves, all these things. And if there was always someone helping them along the way, then they actually did not develop the skill to do that. And then when they go out into the real world, they're ill-equipped. They don't have the knowledge that they need. So sometimes it is a form of oppression because you think you're doing your child a favor and you're actually making it harder for them in their future life. So that's another thing to consider, is the exposure to the luxurious things in life, the exposure to these things. So, there are some children now, the business class example is a funny one for me because, there are kids that I know that they only fly business class and they're 7 years old, 8 years old, and they've been flying it their whole life, and that's all they know. And I try to frame it in a different way, so one kid was telling my son, oh, you guys are going to fly economy back to America? You're just going to fly economy? Why would you do that? And I told my son to tell him, like, economy, it's really for the strong people, because they can handle it. If you can't handle it, then maybe you should go to business class, to show him that it's not just all negative. It's actually giving you something inside, making you tougher, making you more resilient of a person. There's some interesting research where they show that a child that has moved, a couple times in their life, they move from one town to another town, and they have to make new friends and go to a new school. If they do that a couple times in their childhood, it actually correlates to more resilience later in life. They're able to adapt to new situations. They can easily move to some place or find a job and easily, get acclimated, easily deal with many different kinds of people. Whereas if you grew up in the same class, in the same town, the same village, from your very young kindergarten all the way till college, and you never changed any of your friends or never changed any of your environment, and then suddenly you're thrown out into the world where you get a job somewhere else, that's where those children might struggle because they didn't get a chance in their childhood to experience something different, to learn how to negotiate these things. So there's a lot of research like that where you show these early experiences growing up have a major impact on somebody later on in their life. And I'm sure each and every one of us, we can think about something in our childhood, something that was an adventure or some major moment. It could even be something sad. It doesn't have to be something happy. It could be a sad moment. But the fact that you went through it, it shaped you in a certain way. It helped you develop as a person. And even later in life, you look back on it as something that was important to you. It still has an important meaning in your heart. So this is an important thing to think about. We, we set up, once the patterns are set up in the child's life, it's very difficult to break the pattern. Very difficult to break that behavioral, you know, unit that they get used to. It's not impossible, even if a child has grown up a certain way without learning certain rules. Every once in a while in my clinic, I'll see a child who just has no care at all for social rules. Most children, even if they're kind of naughty, misbehaving children, when they see an adult that's a stranger they don't know, they get a little bit shy. They may not act as crazy or say disrespectful things. They may calm down just because they know, oh, socially that would be unacceptable. But every once in a while you meet a child who just doesn't care. They don't care who you are. They don't care if you're authority, older, younger, stranger, family. They don't care. And they have just no concept of this social knowledge. So those children to me are always very interesting, but also very difficult, even for me as a psychologist. Because even when I'm dealing with them, I start getting frustrated with this kid. And I'm supposed to be the doctor, I'm supposed to be the one that's showing mature behavior, but even the kid is annoying me. They're being very rude, very disrespectful, and inside I'm thinking, man, I just want to like strangle this kid or something, but I have to stop myself. I have to hold back. But it makes me think, man, what if this kid was out in society and they ran into somebody who doesn't stop themselves? I'm worried about the kid, that he may say something one day or do something that is going to get him into a fight, or somebody else might beat him up, or somebody else might do something to him because of his social, errors that he's making. So the idea that we have to expose our children to these things, at important times in their life, and the lessons can still be learned, but also understanding that the longer it goes, the harder it gets to break the pattern. So I think one of my theories is, why do we give the kids the devices is because we cannot handle the behavior ourselves. We get very scared or frustrated when we see kids that are acting a certain way or they're acting out, and we can't be patient. So not only has the kids' patience gone down and their ability to handle frustration has gone down, us as adults, our generation is also going down. Maybe because we are also using a lot of digital devices. We're always on the phone too. I try to instill a rule with my children that they don't use any iPad or any technology during the school days. But then it's kind of hypocritical because every day I'm using it, my emails or whoever I'm checking for work, and they're watching me. So I'm wondering if this is like a mixed message that I'm sending. It's kind of like contradicting. And so I think we as adults are also getting affected. Sometimes you go to a restaurant and you see the whole family is on their iPads or iPhones, and nobody's talking to each other, even at dinner time. Some families have instituted some really good measures. One is like they always eat dinner together, and nobody is allowed to have any device. You leave your device charging somewhere. Another good technique is you just have one computer in a main room, the living room, and anybody can come use the computer, but you can't take a laptop or computer back to your bedroom and use it by yourself. That's too isolating, and on top of that, you don't know what content they're accessing. But if it's in the common area, anybody can use it, you're welcome to do it. At night, everybody plugs in their devices into the charger, and they leave it in the charger. Nobody should be sitting in their bed with it. That's actually considered bad sleep hygiene overall. I'm talking not just for the children, but for the adults too. It affects the way that your brain goes to sleep at night. So I think we are being affected. So when we cannot handle the frustration, we're like, oh, okay, forget it. Just give him the iPad or give him the phone. An example of this is, I always ask if a child is having a lot of behavioral problems, I ask the family, did you guys do any kind of behavioral rewards, in the home? Did you try to say like, look, if they do this bad behavior, then you take away their iPhone or you take away their Sony PlayStation or something? And they say, yeah, we tried it, but it didn't work. And so we stopped doing it. And I said, well, how long did you try it for? And they say, oh, we tried it for like 2 days, and he still did the behavior. And to me, I'm thinking, even trying to do the behavioral change, we're not patient with. That should be a week-long, month-long thing, some of these things. But we're not patient. If we don't see the result right away, we say, okay, this is not working. This is not working. Let me try something else. So we ourselves are quick. We're looking for the quick response, the quick answer. How can I quickly fix this in my child? And these are long-term developmental things. It developed over time. It's going to go away over time if you do the right intervention. So this is something that happens, a lot in the young adult years when you're looking at someone early 20s and they start questioning God. Does God exist? I don't even know if I believe anymore. I don't know if I have this faith in my heart. And, they've been exposed to many things growing up. They got different ideas in their head. They met other people over the years who kind of inserted different ideas in their heads. And remember what we talked about, the influence of the peers being stronger than the influence of the parents. So the peer group, a lot of kids, late teenage years, early 20s, that's when they start questioning their faith. And they're exposed to people from other walks of life, and their friends or companions may be different influences. And sometimes they even lose their faith. And this has happened a few times where the family or the parents will say, what can we do now? What should we do? Or can you talk to my son? They'll ask me, like, oh, Dr. Omar, can you talk to my son and maybe figure out how they can believe again? And, unfortunately, my answer maybe is not one that makes them happy, but I usually tell them, like, this developed over years. It's not just going to change like that. Unless Allah wants it to change, Allah can, of course, change your heart in a second. But the human influence took place over a long time. And if you want it to go back, it's going to take a long time to get back. It's not impossible. Some people, you notice, they go on a certain journey in their life. They try things, they experiment with things. They go far from what their family taught them. They go far from the deen. And then somehow they come back, It's amazing how that happens too. With the right influence, they meet the right people. Maybe Allah sends them a certain experience, a certain event happened, and they start, reflecting, and they might come back. But it's a long journey. It's not a quick one night here, one night there. So understanding that people have their own journey, and we have to give them their space and be patient with it. Don't think that that whatever it is you're doing or teaching has no effect just because you don't see the immediate result. The result might not come for a long time. And that's the same thing with the tarbiyah, or raising our children. Certain lessons you give them at age 7, age 8, you may not even see the effect of that until age 20 or something later. And the child will say, like, I still remember when my dad told me this, or my mother told me this when I was young, but it didn't mean anything to me until later in my life.